5, let's get right to it. In the last episode, we connected the majority of the main structure of the rear suspension, including the upper and lower control arms, trailing and tow arms, as well as the new sway bar setup. Now we can move on to the fully upgraded rear brakes. Some generations of Evo Brembo brakes can be installed as a direct bolt-on with little to no modifications, unless you count lower offset wheels and the clearancing of rear dust shields, both of which we have already taken care of here in a previous section. The removal of the angled lip of the shield allows room for the larger diameter and now also ventilated brake rotor. Here we have an old set of front and rear Evo 8 Brembos. I acquired these some time ago with a full rebuild in mind to suit this car. These have an unknown amount of mileage, but surely they've seen better days over the past few decades on whatever Lancer Evolution they came off of. Regardless of that fact, it's anyone's guess the last time these saw actual road use, with the dried out and cracking seals as well as damaged crossover tubes. All of this makes them a perfect candidate for a total rebuild and new lease on life. With all new seals, tubes, bleeders, and decals all gathered up, these are ready to be sent out to be powder coated in their new custom finish and rebuilt. So I received these back from Powder Coat quite some time ago and have already opened and inspected them in the past. I repackaged them for the move to my new house so we can work in this garage. So now we can unbox them for real this time. Along with them, we have Gyrodisc Magic brake pads, some gold zinc drilled and slotted rotors from R1 Concepts, StopTech stainless steel braided brake lines, new pins and clips, as well as caliper mounting hardware. Fortunately, these calipers were packaged very well. I just packaged them up the same way they came from the powder coater, who clearly cares about his work. These calipers were coated in a custom 3-stage finish. A base coat of super chrome for sheen and color depth, a main coat of a bluish candy purple for the main aesthetic, and a clear vision top coat for high gloss and protection. All of that, of course, with new gold decals and stainless steel bleeders. This 3-stage resulted in a deep midnight purple, with black and blue shifting tones, just like I was looking for. This really makes the gold stand out, and of course goes along with the usual colorway. The new finish, along with them being fully refurbished, is really something to behold. Before I go ahead and roll the cinematic to truly show you these, I'm going to ceramic coat them while they're still new, to really get the full effect. As far as brake rotors, in the future I'd likely get just slotted, but these will function well and suit the look. If we were making big power and budget constraints were not in the equation, a set of 2-piece rotors with gold hats would absolutely be the move. Perhaps down the road we can upgrade, if it's warranted. We'll start by installing the new stainless braided lines. Send it up through the bottom of the bracket and carefully thread the hard line into it. Of course, do yourself a favor and use an actual flare nut or line wrench for this. You really don't want to strip these. While holding the hex in place on the line below, snug it down just enough. Now for the locking tabs, position them the best you can by hand and tap them in with a hammer. Ideally, a rubber mallet, as to not mar up anything unnecessarily. With it all in place, verify the torque on the line so we can move on. With the new lines halfway sorted, let's slap on the brake rotors. So, editing Drew from the future here, it occurred to me that these brake rotors are on backwards. These are directional in design, so technically that's the left one. These type of things tend to happen when you're trying to film. So, anyway, back to it. With the brake rotor in place, I'm going to go ahead and add a little dust cover for the open port for the e-brake adjustment. It's good to keep foreign debris out whenever possible. And just the same for the other one. And now to connect the calipers. We'll start by adding a brass crush washer to the line going in. These of course fill the gaps between the mating surfaces and the inlet port, maintaining hydraulic pressure. A little more important than the crush washers you'll find on an oil drain plug. And now we can bring in our caliper and keep it as straight as we can as we thread it onto the line. This gets nice and easy once you have it started. Of course, just keep any unnecessary weight off of it. With the line threaded all the way into the caliper, we'll use a wrench to snug it down, just enough to crush the washer and keep it in place. If this needs to come back off for any reason, try to replace these washers every time. Now we can position the caliper over the brake rotor and prepare to bolt it into the bracket. I applied a little bit of anti-seize to the bolts. Though the calipers fit perfectly, these Evo bolts are just a little bit long. I'm not liking how close they are to the inner surface of the rotor. These Dorman flange bolts are the same M10 1.5 as well as 10.9 strength class, but they're slightly shorter and should clear perfectly while maintaining enough threads through the caliper. And of course, I'll never complain about more gold zinc hardware. Alright, take two, the new bolts are in place and torqued down. Now that's the gap I was looking for. Full engagement of the threads in the caliper, but a healthy distance from the rotor. Now let's move on to brake pads. Before we do that, I really like to have the rotor fixed in place and not shifting on the hub while we work. I snagged one of the conical seats from my fender roller and an old lug nut, just to keep things still. Here we have our new pins and clips, as well as some spare crush washers. Though I still have the original hardware, they're just a little rusty to put in these new calipers. Now using my usual go-to silicone ceramic grease, we can go ahead and install these brake pads. If you have a look at the brake pads, you can actually see that they're slightly asymmetrical. This will tell you which is installed in the front and the rear of the caliper. They're just offset ever so slightly from center. It's a little hard to see at first. Now we just have a few surfaces to grease up. First the holes for the pins. Of course the sides of the pads where they slot into the caliper. And the back of the pad on the shim where the piston meets it. With the pins waiting in tow, go ahead and drop the first pad in. Start the pins from the back side to keep it in place and grab the other pad. With the grease basically just the same, we can go ahead and drop it in, but this one's going to need just a little bit of help for alignment purposes. The outer pad will essentially fall down just a little bit more than the rear one. I end up using some of the wrapping paper from the box just to hold it in place for me. With the pins partway through, we can bring the clips into position. Before placing it down, I added some grease to the tabs on the underside, just so they make contact with the pads. Now we can carefully send the pins all the way through to get everything fixed in place. This is where I first ran into some trouble. Given that these calipers are freshly powder coated, these openings needed to be fought through for that first time. Unfortunately, that led to me needing to use a level of force I would consider a bit excessive. My small and light ball peen hammer ended up getting swapped out for a heavy Estwing sledge. With my knee bracing the caliper, this was able to do the trick. Of course, with a little bit of added stress. And now the pins are locked through all the way. It just took a little bit more brute force than I would have liked. Just a quick wipe of the sweat from my palms, and we're looking good. And now, same procedure for the other side. Let's get this all squared away. Although they may not yet be bled and fully operational, that's the new rear brake setup all wrapped up. With the big brake kit installed, next time we could talk wheels, tires, and suspension. Until then, trust the process. I'll see you guys in the next video.